Hello, Sue and Randy.
Hi, Mike and
Hello.
Andrea. Welcome back.
Hello.
Welcome back. Welcome back to New York. We're so glad to see you.
Thank you.
We are here again tonight, Stu and Randy Pinto, live on Facebook at our part of our live chat series, and we are moving on to topic 6. But before we do want to go back and review just briefly, just very briefly, about last week's topic, which was control issues. So, Mike and Andrea, can you just give us a quick recap?
Okay, we're glad to be here. We kind of assimilated how our relationship in control or out of control is like driving a car and suddenly the brakes don't work or the power steering doesn't work. And we're stuck on a runaway car. And it's much the same in marriage. Sometimes we're out of control of the way things are working out in our relationship. So, we have to get back in the driver's seat, switch gears, apply the brakes. And we really sometimes struggle as to how we get into control. And really, I have no right to control Andrea. She has no right to control me as well. And control is an illusion. We might think that we have everything worked out in our minds, but at the end of the day, control is an illusion. All we can control is ourselves. So that's the thing we learned from the third option. There was the balance line where there was out of control, and then there's being controlled, someone running your life. But the answer, the third option on that balance line in the middle, is self-control. So that's what that was really about last week.
Okay, excellent. And I imagine that with that balance line, whether you're on the out of control end or if you're in the controlled or overly controlled end, there's various levels of listening or not listening happening there, which actually brings us into this week's topic, which is listening beyond the words. So why do we stop listening? What happens where we stop listening to each other, or what's going on? How do we avoid listening? What do we do? What does it look like?
So I would start tonight by sharing a little bit of how when Mike and I met, listening was a big component in our relationship. I think it's really what drew us together. I looked at Mike in our conversations, and he was always engaged with me, eye to eye. And the more we started to go out and date, we sat close together. There was such a focus that we would have on each other. And, so I identify that as the beginning stages of listening. I picked up on that right away. And it's very easy, I think, for all of us to see when we go out in public. You can identify those people that are either dating or they're newlyweds, because you can just see that they're connected and they're listening to one another. So, I think in order to assess why don't we listen, we have to remember the times that we really were listening to each other, or that we notice in other people that they are engaged and they are listening. I think for ourselves, as time goes on, I'll say a little bit, and Mike can share a little too. You start to take each other for granted, and it becomes work. It becomes work to try to ask questions and to try to distract yourself from what you're doing, to put your focus on the other person. Marriage over the years, as that builds, I think we see that happen a lot in marriage relationships where there's less and less listening. We find ourselves talking from one room to 3 rooms away and expect that the other person hears us or even cares about what we're saying. So that's been something over the years that we've tried to focus on, saying, let's speak to each other in the same room, at least, or at least not try to speak through the bathroom door with each other. So listening goes from being easy and being engaged and excited about hearing what the other person has to say. And it starts to become work. It starts to become a little bit of a chore. It takes time. It takes energy. And I think we get a little bit lazy.
Yeah, and people are basically selfish. We'd rather talk about our own agenda sometimes and not really, really listen to what Andrea is trying to say. Very guilty about that. I bust in. It's like I'm saying my stuff is more important than your stuff, and that's not good for a marriage. It's bad, And we know that we don't want to hear truths which might be painful. Like if she says something to me that, I don't like the way you do this or do that, I don't want to hear that, but it might be true. And I need to be open to listening to what she has to say to me. And at the end of the day, we always say, we figure, if it's just nagging or it's critical or there's a lot of complaints, nobody wants to really listen to that. But that's what it evolves to when we don't have that respect for the other person that we know that we have to have. And when we were dating, we did have that. It's been said that listening it feels like being loved. And it's so close to being loved that the two are indistinguishable. And that was a concept that I learned at Third Option. And I said, wow, I gotta really listen about that. Being heard is like being loved, but it is because you're paying that attention to that other person that's the most important person in your life. And when you don't give them that respect, you start to go downhill. And that's just not the way it was meant to be.
It is funny, Mike, you took the words right out of my mouth because I saw that quote somewhere this week myself. I don't know where I saw it, but I saw the same thing, and I was thinking about this lesson. And in a way, it's counterintuitive from what you were saying, Andrea, right? So that's how it started. That was the beginning, and that's what did it. And the things that would give us what we want and make us happy, we go this way because, quite frankly, life happens, right? You've got when you're young and it starts, and there's not as much to interfere. And there's that focus, as you said, and then things start getting in the way and more, and it becomes like this, and pretty soon it turns into as you were describing, Mike. So it's common, it's unintentional, and that's why this program helps to intentionally try to build the skills to stay on track, right?
Right. And we've said in previous sessions too. We see, and hopefully our listeners are seeing also the way these topics connect to one another. And in session 4, we were talking about the power struggle and how important it is to win, when we're in that mode. And it's kind of a communication mode. It becomes in marriage where we find it becomes a competition. It's kind of like that tennis match or any other discussion that you get in. And you find you're talking over someone, or often here's another pitfall, finishing somebody's sentence because you think you know what they wanted to say. So, we'll be out in public and all of a sudden you're with another couple and one person starts talking, the other person jumps in and finishes their sentence. So things like that also become apparent to us as we actually look at the topic of listening. And many people, including ourselves, confuse hearing with listening. And that's another thing to really think about. Just hearing someone, nodding your head, or being in the same room with somebody that's talking about a particular topic. It might be a deep thought or it could be a casual comment. We do hear one another, but we have to ask ourselves, are we really listening? If I'm listening, I turn towards Mike. I stop what I'm doing. I focus on what he's saying. So it's a consciousness of. So tonight we're kind of trying to break it down and then identify that we do stop. We perhaps have that in the beginning, but where does it kind of go over into the ditch? So here's some examples too we can go into. There's ways of behaving, things we do, we can call them tricks, to avoid listening to one another. And they could be things like saying later, but later never comes. So that put off is just, yeah, okay, I heard you. I'll do it later. Another form is monopolizing the discussion. And I just alluded to that, interrupting, controlling the conversation, constant talking. That's a form of avoiding listening.
And another one is escapes, TV, sports, alcohol, drugs, clubs, children, putting around the house. I mean, stuff we all have to
Cleaning.
do. Yeah, I try to avoid that one.
Yeah.
But it's those are things that get in the way of really listening well. I mean, those things they're just barriers to our learning about how we can listen to each other.
Well, and Andrea, I'm sorry, Mike, Andrea, what you described as a term for it is called active listening. And so we either accidentally or intuitively did that at the beginning of relationships, but we're not really doing it intentionally, and we don't really know how, and we stopped doing it for all the reasons you just mentioned. Active listening.
That's right, Randy. And active listening means that you're looking in their eyes. You're looking to see if their emotions come out. Like if somebody's upset about something, the nostrils might flare or something like that, you know? And you can tell, and that's active listening because the person on the other side is seeing, you know, what's going on in that person's head as they say it. So sometimes we don't pay attention. If we've got our head down looking at a book or a computer or a phone, we're not really listening. And it's again, a lack of respect for Andrew.
And we, sorry, I'm going to do it again, Sam. You listen. But it just reminded me that when our children were small, we would stop and say, well, look in the eyes and talk to each other, communicate that way. They're teenagers. They're certainly not doing it anymore. But we were trying to teach that. But here we are. We're not really doing that, setting that great an example ourselves, right? On a
Exactly. I'd like to point out, too, we have grandchildren, little grandchildren, and my kids did this when we were young. They'd take your chin.
Yeah.
Pull your face towards them. And I love it when they do it because, you know, kids are just who they are. They don't pull any,
very direct.
Yeah, they don't pull any punches. But sometimes you'd really like to do that to someone when you feel like they're ignoring you or you feel ignored or not heard.
Well, and I think one of the things too that you know, even if you're looking at the other person and you're giving the impression that you're listening, but I know I've done this, and I've done this just for stupid reasons, where if I'm meeting somebody and they're telling me their name, I'm sort of listening, but quite frankly, I'm also thinking, what am I going to say? So, you know, I think there's that happening too, where we're so focused on what our argument is, especially in the heat of a moment or a discussion. You know, we might be looking at the person, but in our minds, we're thinking, well, this is what I want to say. These are the points I want to make. And we haven't heard a thing that, you know, the other person has said. So we have to be very mindful of that.
And that's called when we confuse listening for waiting for the other person to stop so I can start talking, right?
Yeah.
Are you done yet?
Or interrupting them.
That's the next step worse, correct?
Yeah, it is. And you know, I'm a person that sometimes likes to take shortcuts and, you know, hurry up, get it out, because I know what you're going to say anyway. And I know what it's going to be. So we don't have time for all this stuff. Let's just say it and let's get on to the next thing. And, you know, again, it's an act of disrespect. So I really struggle with that in many times because, like, when I was dating her, I paid attention. I was looking at her and I was noting every word. But as we get into our life with all of its issues and problems and responsibilities, we get away from it. And it's really not the right way to be. Got to get back on it.
Another thing we haven't mentioned, but it's a behavior that I've had to look at. Maybe other people do too. Withdrawal is also a form of refusing to participate and refusing to listen. Sulking, walking away from an argument or a discussion before it's finished. Again, you know, just the avoidance of, in all of these topics, trying to get to the middle always involves conversation. We have to be all in. Both of us have to be all in. So by using all of these distractive measures, we buy a way out.
And technology is lending itself to go down that path way too easy and way too often, right?
It is.
Well, that's a big truth
Bad
right there.
habits. Bad habits, yeah.
Mhm.
It helps, it amplifies the bad habits, I guess is a good way to say it.
Mhm.
Right. Let's talk about the balance, when it comes to this particular topic. What are the ends of the balance? What do they look like?
Well, there's not listening at all. Okay. Like, I don't have time for this, so I'm not going to listen, is on one end. And on the other end, there's not speaking, like the person is closed. They're just not going to be bothered with saying anything. So those are two diverse opposites. So those are barriers to getting to listening. So if you want to put up the third option, Sue, on the screen for the people to see.
Okay. Give me 1 second. Again, having some little issues here because that's just the way it goes.
Sometimes it's said another way. It's my truth, her truth, and then the third option is the truth. So when you see that, the third option really is communicating. It's listening, it's speaking, and looking for the truth. Because when you get right to it, listening is trying to understand your spouse, your husband or your wife. We want to understand them. That's why we got married. We're here to try to help each other and understand where they're coming from. We're going to get into that in a minute, but that's the whole purpose of listening.
Yes, and I've heard it said in the past too, it's an old expression, well, there's always two sides to the story. And I like this little visual of the circle, the concentric circles that join in the middle, because unless we have empathy, unless we try to put ourselves in another person's shoes by listening to the words that Mike is telling me, I can begin to have empathy. I can begin to find out and try to understand why he either thinks a certain way, feels a certain way, or is choosing to behave a certain way based on what he believes to be true. And likewise, if he asks me those things about what I'm trying to say, the listening leads to empathy, which leads to understanding. And that's our whole point throughout all of third option, is to get to where the communication leads us to an understanding. And in the understanding, you have an acceptance for one another. And therefore, you don't have the issues with power and expectation and disrespect. And all the other stuff seems to come into perspective once we begin to communicate. So the skills, our goal is that of understanding. And as Randy led into earlier, there's an actual process to practice when we're trying to become better listeners. So in third option, we do call it a reflective listening process. And we practice doing that with each other by first having full attention with one another, facing someone, looking at them, physically engaging. I'm here, I'm next to you, and I'm here, and I do want to listen to you. And then you take turns with people one at a time, reflecting and explaining themselves to you. The other person then says, so I'm hearing you say that you're thinking this way and you feel this way about it. Am I correct? And then Mike could have a chance to say, well, yes, but it's a little bit more like this. So then I could go back to him and repeat it and ask him to tell me more. Well, could you tell me a little bit more about your feeling? I really would like to understand. And then he can tell me more, and I can finally get to a point where he could say to me, I think you understand what I'm trying to convey to you. So and then the process reverses. Maybe not at that very moment, because the topic might be about something one person needs to share. But eventually you get in a reversal in this process in your relationship where you are giving your attention, You're saying your thoughts and feelings. That other person reflects. So I think I've heard you say such and such. Am I correct? And they affirm it, or they add to it, or they do whatever they have to do to make you understand it better till you get to a point, hopefully, that is your goal.
Right. So the steps are full attention. We reflect it back so that we try to understand what she was saying. And then the third one is check it out. Did you really mean this? And she might say, well, not like that, but more like this. And then you repeat it just to make sure that you've got it. And then you kind of reverse the process when I have to say something that perhaps is on my mind, and she then goes through that process with me. So it's a back and forth, paying attention, and it's what they call reflective listening. And some of the solutions for reflecting are, it sounds like, maybe it sounds like, something that happened in the past. Those are good aids that you have, perhaps, for that. Or there's an emotion. Well, I was frustrated when you did that because this is how I reacted. And then, sometimes reaction is emotional. And emotion can be a tool and it can be a weapon. And when we use our emotions and we think emotionally, we always make the wrong decision. We've talked about that before, and we'll talk about it again in some other segments that we do. And then another way to do this solution for reflecting is, are you saying? And then you give that other person the opportunity to tell you exactly how it is for them. And in that way, if I can reflect back that she's feeling, we've hit the gold mine, because that's when we have that understanding that we talked about. And that's important. And when we take these shortcuts and when we don't pay attention, we're going down the wrong path. And that's where we get into trouble in our relationship. So I think listening, probably out of all the 14 topics, they're all important. But for me, listening is the one that I have to pay the most attention to.
Yeah, and I brought up the slide here as you were talking about the reflective listening, so that we could kind of see it right there in black and white to help people understand what it means, giving the person that full attention, which means including watching their nonverbals, then reflecting back, then checking for accuracy, and then repeating the steps one through three, changing roles. And there's that quote that you referenced at the beginning of the program is,
Yes.
being heard is so close to being loved that for the average person, they are almost indistinguishable. And I can totally understand that, because, and I think you can see it whether you're talking to your kids or if you're talking to your partner and you're trying to get something across, something out to them. And finally, when there's that moment of recognition on their face, oh, I get it. There's such a relief, I think, for you to realize that they understand me. We just want to be validated. We want to have that validation.
Absolutely. Absolutely, Sue. And I think it's important maybe to say it this way too. Listening is not what it's not, because maybe, we've got the wrong idea. Listening is not interrupting with our own agenda, fixing, judging, or saying, don't feel that way. Don't feel that. We shouldn't feel that way. If that negates people's feelings. And we've kind of got a poem here. It's a very short poem that kind of says that it's one on listening. Michael, help me out here. It says, when I ask you to listen to me and you start giving advice, you have not done what I asked.
When I ask you to listen to me and you begin to tell me why I shouldn't feel that way, you are trampling on my feelings.
When I ask you to listen to me and you feel you have to do something to solve my problem, you have failed me. Strange as that may seem.
Listen. All I asked was that you listen, not talk or do, just hear me.
Yeah, that's a beautiful poem. I think it really puts a fine point on what the power of listening can do for each of us in any role. So as we finish up for this evening, which I'm trying to get my going to finish up by putting up our questions to ponder, that sort of thing. What are the quick takeaways from this topic, really quick?
Well, listening is probably one of the key, most important parts of our marriage or any relationship. It's hard work. And sometimes I think it's harder the longer than you are together. We've been together 48 years, so I can kind of say that it is work to get to that level where we're listening. This process of reflective listening that you already put the chart up is key. And also that we have heard what the other person really said. That's really important, that we heard what they said and that we're not assuming what they said, that we know what they said.
Right.
So that's important. Your chart about the his truth, her truth. I mean, I think the visually, thinking about that this week is a great exercise. Is it just my perception that's the truth? Can I try to, for this week, every day when somebody approaches me in a relationship, can I give them the benefit of the doubt? Can I put myself in their shoes and listen and think, well, they're saying that or behaving that way. I wonder if it's because of something that is their truth. If you really get into those conversations, you might find out. And the real truth is in the middle.
Right.
Those would be things. Anything else you want to add for this week? Mostly the process.
Right.
Listening takes time and effort. It takes energy and it takes quiet. We can't do it when we're doing everything else, the multitask thing that, again, I like to try to do that a lot. And it really takes time, effort, energy, and quiet. It takes the quiet. And, when we do it correctly, it's like giving your husband or wife a gift. That's what listening is about. And again, listening feels like love. It's like being loved and it's like loving because it's effort from both people. And our goal in marriage, in our relationship, is to understand where that other person is, where they're coming from, and using empathy to try to get in their skin and find out where they really are. When we do that, marriages work, and that's
Right.
important.
And I think very often we all make the mistake. I'm sure you have too. If you're in the same room having a conversation with each other, you think that your mere presence there signifies that you're listening. And I think that this is the challenge of this topic and learning what it really means. You have to do more than just be present in the room. It is an engaging process, like Mike said. The work is in wanting to know more and asking that spouse. If you don't have it right and you don't have it understood, stay with them and work at it and ask them more questions and encourage them to tell me more. Is this right? Does it feel this way? Is it like when I had this feeling? I mean, eventually you will get to where you want to be and have an understanding.
Right.
Like anything, when we first started out trying to learn this process, we're not very good at it, especially the guys. They just don't have time for it. It's just not their thing. Well, the more we do work at it, the more successful we'll be. And that's, again, what your spouse wants. And if we can do that for them, it doesn't mean you have to do it for 2 hours. If you can do it for 10 minutes, that's all that she's looking for.
Right.
She's not looking for this to be hours on end, just a few minutes, hopefully every day. And that goes a long way of having a successful marriage. It really does.
And the previous slide that was just up there was exactly that suggested exercise of just, to practice first is to, at the end of each day, each spouse take a turn and say, how was your day? Let that spouse tell you how their day was, how they were feeling, and then you reflect back and then check the accuracy. So just by starting that is a great opportunity to practice. So as we finish up our time this week, we're just going to take a quick look at some of the questions to think about in terms of ourselves. You know, as you can see, they're all here. Is there any one of those questions that you think stands out?
What ways do I use to avoid listening? Sometimes I just don't want to put the effort in. It's being selfish. And sometimes that's one that I have to work on in my listening skills.
Okay.
For me, I think do I create an accepting atmosphere which encourages my spouse to communicate? With that one, it reminds me about timing. It's important in the relationship. Read each other's body language and all. And I need to learn, I think everybody needs to learn when's a good time to approach this. When's the best time to start that conversation, to really make the effort to sit and listen.
Okay, good. And then we go on to, for your spouse, these are some of the questions to think about during the week. Could a change of my attitude help open channels of communication? If necessary, do I insist on my right to be equally heard? So those are a couple of questions to ponder this week. As we come to the end, some of the final thoughts is that, you know, each of these sessions, it's important to accept responsibility for our own thoughts, our own behaviors, and the goal is for self-change. I can only change myself, Randy can only change himself, and that if even just one of us makes that effort to change, then the relationship will change. So we, as every week, we welcome any questions or comments about the Third Option program. You can view this video and our previous live stream chats on either our Facebook page or our YouTube page. Please also feel free to email me, Mike, or Andrea at the emails that you see in front of you. You can comment on our Facebook page and even on Twitter at our Twitter handle at the Third Option. And you know, I just want to mention again, just so that people have this information, that the video program that you can stream or you can purchase the DVD, $89 and $99 respectively, is that you can go to our webpage and check those out. And Mike and Andrea, we thank you again for joining us and for giving us this information to help us become better people, better partners, better family members. So we will see you again next week, and we'll be on topic 7. We're halfway through.
Well, great to be with you tonight. Yes, next session, personality differences.
That's a good one.
That is a good one.
I'm not like her and she's not like me.
Yeah,
So we'll
just
get into
music
that.
alone.
Opposites attract.
All right. Thank you again, everybody. Please take care. Keep well.
Thank you.
Same to you.
Enjoy your week.